I've worked at this company for almost 5 years. Not glamorous, not high-paying, but stable. I handle logistics, spreadsheets, shipping schedules, warehouse coordination, the kind of invisible work that only gets noticed when something goes wrong. My boss, Brian, was the kind of guy who thought leadership meant intimidation. Always yelling, always criticizing, but never lifting a finger himself. Still, I tolerated it because I needed the job. Rent doesn't pay itself. But last Monday, everything changed. It started with a minor mistake. One of the drivers mixed up delivery times and a shipment was delayed by 2 hours. I caught it, fixed it, and even called the client to smooth things over. Everything was fine, or so I thought. At our morning meeting, Brian slammed his coffee mug down so hard it spilled across the conference table. "Whose screw-up cost us a client today?" he barked. Everyone went dead silent. He turned to me, eyes burning. "Was it you, Jamie?" I opened my mouth to explain, but he didn't let me. "You've been sloppy lately. Maybe this job's too much for you." The room was silent. 15 pairs of eyes on me. I could feel the heat rising to my face. I said, "I already fixed it. The client's fine. You'd know that if you read the report." He smirked. "Oh, I read it. You just love covering your own ass, don't you?" People laughed, that nervous, forced kind of laugh you make when your boss is watching. And something inside me snapped. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there staring at him, my heart pounding. All those months of being talked down to, blamed for things I didn't do, cleaning up his mistakes while he bragged to upper management, it all boiled over. I stood up slowly. "Brian, you want to talk about covering someone's ass? Let's do that." The room went completely still. You could have heard the air conditioning hum. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, pretending to look amused. "Oh, this should be good." "Yeah," I said, voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's talk about how you forgot to file the inspection forms last quarter and made me backdate them so the company wouldn't get fined. Or how you take credit for my team's numbers when corporate calls." His smirk faltered. Just a bit. I kept going. "Or maybe we should talk about that training trip you expensed last month. The one at the resort in Florida where you posted pictures with your cousin." You could feel the collective inhale of the entire room. He stood up, face going red. "That's enough." "No," I said. "It's not." Everyone was staring now, some in shock, some in awe, a few trying not to smile. "Apologize," he demanded, stepping closer. I laughed. "For what? Telling the truth." He reached across the table, grabbed my report folder and threw it onto the floor. "Get out of my office." I picked up my folder, hands trembling but my voice steady. "Gladly." The moment I walked out, I could hear whispers spreading like wildfire behind me. My coworker Tara ran after me into the hallway, her eyes wide. "Holy crap, Jamie, you just nuked your career." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped being afraid of someone who never deserved my respect." I went home that day half expecting a termination email. Instead, around 6 p.m., I got a message from HR. "Please come in tomorrow morning. We need to discuss recent events." I didn't sleep that night. I rehearsed every possible outcome: getting fired, escorted out, blacklisted from every logistics firm in town. But when I walked into the HR office, something was different. They looked serious, but not angry. One of them slid a folder across the table. "Jamie, is it true that Brian asked you to falsify inspection forms?" My heart stopped. "Yes," I said carefully. "He did more than once." They exchanged looks. Then the woman in HR said quietly, "We've been investigating similar complaints. You might have just helped us confirm what we needed." I blinked. "Wait, you're saying?" She nodded. "We'll handle it from here. Thank you for coming forward." When I left the HR office that day, I felt lighter, like I'd just taken off a backpack full of bricks I didn't even realize I was carrying. But there was also fear, the kind that creeps up when you realize you've just gone up against someone who loves revenge. Brian didn't show up to work the next day, or the next one. The office felt weirdly quiet, like the calm after a storm. Everyone kept asking each other, "Did you hear anything?" But no one knew. On Thursday, we got the email. Subject line: Leadership transition. It was corporate speak for he's gone. No explanation, no farewell message, just a short paragraph saying Brian was no longer with the company and that an interim manager would take over. The office buzzed with whispers for the rest of the day. Some people were relieved, others were terrified, and me, I just sat there trying to process it. That night my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Hope you're proud of yourself, you think you won, watch your back." I froze. I knew it was him, the phrasing, the tone, even the punctuation. Brian had that passive-aggressive style that could cut you without ever saying a bad word. For a few minutes, I just stared at the message. Then I typed back, "Lose my number, Brian." I hovered over send, then deleted it. I didn't owe him anything, not a response, not even acknowledgement, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. The next few days, I kept seeing a black SUV parked across from my apartment building. Always the same spot, always the same time around sunset. I told myself it was coincidence. A neighbor, delivery guy, anything else. Until one evening when I came home late and saw someone standing beside it. A tall man, wearing a baseball cap, smoking. I couldn't see his face, but the way he stood, the posture, it was him. I ducked behind a parked car, my heart racing so fast I could barely breathe. He stayed there for a few minutes, then got in the SUV and drove off. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the moment in loops, the smoke curling in the air, the flash of the lighter, that slow, familiar stance. Was he trying to scare me? Or was he waiting for me to crack? By the weekend, I'd had enough. I called HR again and told them about the messages and the SUV. They sounded concerned but cautious, like they didn't want to admit how serious it was. "Jamie, we'll look into it," they said. "But without proof, it's hard for us to act." Proof. Right. Because being terrified in your own home isn't enough unless you can document it, so I decided to get proof. I borrowed my neighbor's dashcam and mounted it in my window, pointing toward the street. Every night for a week, it recorded footage of that same black SUV parking across the street. Sometimes it stayed for an hour, sometimes 3. On Thursday night, the SUV didn't just park. It rolled down the window, and the camera caught him, Brian, sitting there, staring right at my building. I took the footage to HR the next morning. This time, they didn't hesitate. Within hours, corporate security was involved. They called me back that afternoon and said, "We've contacted the authorities. Don't go anywhere alone for the next few days." I didn't even realize I was crying until the HR rep handed me a tissue. That night, I got another message. "You didn't have to do this. We could have fixed it between us." I stared at the text for a long time before replying, "No, Brian, you broke it. I'm just done pretending it's fine." 2 days later, the police showed up at my door. At first, my stomach dropped. I thought maybe I was in trouble somehow. But they were calm, professional, and asked if I could identify a photo. It was Brian, mugshot style. They told me they'd picked him up that morning after he'd been spotted near my building again. He was charged with harassment and violating a restraining order filed by another former employee. Apparently, I wasn't the first person he'd stalked after getting fired. That realization hit me like a punch. All this time, I thought I just angered a bitter ex-boss. But no, this man had a pattern. He thrived on control, even after losing it. The officers asked me to come in to give a formal statement. Sitting in that small, sterile room with the flickering fluorescent light, I told them everything. The fake inspection forms, the humiliation at work, the text messages, the SUV. One of the detectives leaned back and said, "You did the right thing. Guys like him, they don't stop until someone stands up to them." When I left the station, I sat in my car for a long time, just staring out the windshield. The adrenaline was gone, but the fear lingered. I kept expecting my phone to buzz again. But it didn't. Not that day, not the next. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. When I got to work Monday morning, people actually smiled when they saw me. Someone had brought donuts for surviving the Brian era, as they called it. It felt like a funeral for toxicity, and honestly, it was the closure I didn't know I needed. The new interim manager, Miss Patel, was calm, fair, and terrifyingly organized. She pulled me aside and said, "I read through everything. You handled that situation with more restraint than most people could." For a second, I thought I was going to cry again. But I just nodded and said, "I was tired of being scared." She smiled softly. "Then let's build something better." Under her, the whole vibe of the office changed. People talked more. There was laughter again. Deadlines still sucked, but no one was being screamed at for them. It was weird, peaceful even. One afternoon, Tara came over to my desk and said, "You know, you basically became a legend here." I laughed. "Yeah, the idiot who shouted at her boss in front of everyone." "No," she said. "The one who finally said what we were all too scared to." A few weeks later, I got an email from corporate. Subject: Opportunity for advancement. Apparently, they'd reviewed my record and feedback from HR, and they wanted to promote me. Not to Brian's position, thank God, but to a regional coordinator role. Higher pay, more responsibility, and a clean slate. I accepted. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted to make sure no one else went through what I did. On my last day in that old office, I stood by the window, looking out at the street. The same view I used to watch every night, terrified that Brian's SUV would appear again. But now the street was empty, just regular cars. Regular people. Tara walked up behind me. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "Just thinking about how quiet it is when the noise finally stops." She nudged me. "Well, don't get too used to it. Regional managers don't get much quiet." We both laughed. As I packed up my things, I thought about that first moment, the one in the conference room when Brian humiliated me. I remembered the look on his face when I finally spoke up. And I realized something. Sometimes, standing up for yourself doesn't just change your life, it changes the whole room. It's been 6 months since everything happened. Brian took a plea deal and moved out of state. HR sent a quiet update saying the case was closed. I don't think about him much anymore, except when I catch myself doubting whether I did the right thing. Then I remember that text he sent me. "We could have fixed it between us." No, we couldn't have, because between us meant silence, and silence is how people like him keep winning. These days, I mentor new hires. I tell them, if someone in power ever makes you feel small, remember, they only seem big because everyone else is too scared to look them in the eye. Sometimes, when I walk past the old building, I glance up at those windows. And I swear, for just a second, I can still see the faint reflection of that conference room. But this time, I'm the one standing tall. The promotion came with its own kind of storm. Suddenly, I was the one people went to for decisions, approvals, explanations. And while I liked the new sense of control, there were moments when I caught myself sounding like him. It wasn't on purpose. Just small things, the clipped tone in an email, the deep sigh when someone made a small mistake. The same habits I'd hated in Brian were trying to crawl out of me. One afternoon, during a meeting, a new guy named Evan stumbled through a presentation. He'd mixed up data from 2 departments, and my first instinct was to snap. But then I saw the look on his face, pale, nervous, waiting for judgment. And I remembered me. Sitting in that same chair months ago, wishing someone would just give me a chance instead of tearing me apart. So I took a breath. "Hey, Evan," I said, "you mixed the data, but the format's great. Let's fix it together after lunch." He blinked in surprise. "You're not mad?" "No," I said, "I've seen worse. Trust me." It felt like exorcising a ghost, one small act of choosing kindness where cruelty used to live. Outside of work, though, things weren't as easy. I started having these dreams, the kind that don't feel like dreams at all. I'd wake up convinced I saw Brian standing in my hallway or sitting in his SUV outside. Every sound made me jump. My therapist called it residual trauma. I called it paranoia. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise from the hallway, a soft click, like someone testing a lock. I froze. The city outside was dead quiet. My phone was on the nightstand, my heart hammering so loud it drowned everything else. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. But on the floor I saw something small, white and square, a Polaroid. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a photo of the hallway itself, taken from just outside my door. I didn't sleep that night. By morning I'd convinced myself it couldn't be him. He was out of state. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe my neighbors had stupid sense of humor. But that photo, it looked fresh. I called the police, showed them the picture, and they sent a patrol car. The officers were polite but dismissive. Could be a kid messing around, one said. We'll keep an eye out. After they left, I sat on my couch staring at the photo for hours. The angle, the lighting, it was exactly the same as the building's hallway camera view. But there were no security cameras on my floor. So how did he get that shot? That evening I checked the footage from my own hallway camera, the little motion sensor one I'd bought after the SUV incident. Around 1:57 a.m. the screen flickered, static, then black, for about 30 seconds. When it came back, the hallway was empty, except for something new on the floor. The Polaroid. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped the flash drive with the footage. I couldn't believe what I'd just seen, that 30-second blackout. It wasn't a technical glitch. Someone had tampered with the camera. I called the property manager the next morning and demanded to see the building's security feed. He hesitated at first, mumbling something about privacy policies, but when I showed him the Polaroid, his face turned pale. We went into the office, and he pulled up the footage from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. At first, nothing, empty halls, flickering lights, just that low, humming sound of cheap cameras. Then, right around 1:57 a.m., the same second my feed went dark, we caught it. A man in a hoodie stepped out of the stairwell. He didn't look around. He walked straight to my door like he knew exactly where to go. He stood there for about 20 seconds, then bent down and placed something on the floor. The Polaroid. The manager looked at me. "You said your old boss moved out of state, right?" "Yeah," I whispered. "He's not supposed to be anywhere near here." The manager nodded slowly, then replayed the footage frame by frame. And there it was when the man turned to leave. The light hit his face just enough for a glimpse. It was Brian. The police came back that same day. This time they weren't casual or dismissive. They watched the footage twice, asked a dozen questions, and finally said, "We're putting out a warrant. You need to stay somewhere else tonight." I packed a bag, shaking the entire time. I tried to call my mom, but she was asleep and didn't answer. I didn't want to scare her anyway, so I booked a cheap motel across town. But fear isn't logical. Even in that motel room, new locks, new walls, new sounds, I kept thinking I heard his footsteps. The air conditioner's hum sounded like breathing. The shadows under the door looked like shoes. The next morning, HR called me. "Jamie," my HR rep said, voice tight, "we just got word that Brian tried to contact one of your old coworkers through LinkedIn. He asked about you." I could barely speak. "He's obsessed. This isn't about work anymore." "No," she said quietly. "It's about control." A few days later, the police caught him again. He'd been living out of his SUV in a parking lot less than a mile from my apartment. When they searched his car, they found several Polaroids, all of my building, my window, even one of me walking my dog. That one made my stomach drop. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been following. I had to go in and identify the photos as evidence. Sitting in that cold, gray interrogation room again, I stared at them one by one, each one a reminder that I'd been under his eyes for weeks. One of the detectives said softly, "You're lucky he didn't try to break in." Lucky. That word stuck with me. I didn't feel lucky. I felt exposed, violated. They promised he'd be transferred back to the state where his probation had been issued. "He's done," they said. "You can breathe now." But I didn't. Not yet. Because even after he was gone, the silence felt wrong. Like the world was waiting for the next shoe to drop. The next few weeks were a strange mix of relief and paranoia. I'd walk to work and still glance over my shoulder every few blocks, half expecting to see that black SUV trailing behind me again. My therapist said it was a residual trauma response. I said it was survival. I started avoiding my apartment after dark. I'd stay late at the office, pretending to finish reports just so I wouldn't have to sit in my living room and wonder if someone was outside my window. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass, eyes tired, shoulders tense, and for a moment I didn't even recognize myself. Tara noticed. "You're jumpy," she said one afternoon, handing me coffee. "You keep looking at the door like someone's about to walk in." "I'm fine," I lied, but I wasn't. Every small sound, the creak of the hallway floor, the elevator bell, even my phone buzzing, made me flinch. I'd spent months under his shadow, and now that he was gone, the shadow still clung to me. One night, I decided to reclaim my space. I stood in my apartment, all the lights on, and said out loud, "You don't live here anymore, Brian." It sounded ridiculous, but somehow, saying it made the silence feel a little less heavy. A month later, I got called to a regional conference for all department heads. It was my first real public appearance since everything had gone down, and I was nervous, not about speaking, but about being seen. Standing at the podium, I looked out over a room full of people, all waiting for me to talk about leadership integrity. The irony wasn't lost on me, so I told them my story, not the sanitized version, the real one. How I'd been humiliated, manipulated, stalked, and still showed up to work because I thought quitting would mean losing. How silence had almost broken me. When I finished, the room was completely still. Then people started clapping. Not polite applause, real, raw, grateful clapping. Afterward, a younger manager came up to me, eyes glassy. "I had a boss like that once," she said. "You just described everything I never told anyone." That moment, that single sentence, made it all worth it. I realized I wasn't just telling my story. I was telling ours. After the conference, I got dozens of messages from people across the company. Some were just words of support. Others shared their own horror stories, bullying, harassment, manipulation. It was overwhelming, but it was also healing. Corporate ended up launching a new training program for ethical leadership, and Miss Patel asked me to help design it. It felt surreal, sitting in meetings about compassion, empathy, and trust, the very things our old workplace had lacked. One afternoon, I got a message from an unknown number. My stomach dropped instantly, that old panic reflex. But when I opened it, it wasn't Brian. It was from one of his former employees at another company. "He's in a rehabilitation program now, mandatory counseling. He's not allowed to contact anyone from your company again. I thought you should know." I didn't know how to feel. Relief, closure, pity. Maybe a mix of all three. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the story wasn't about him anymore. It was about what came after. It's been almost a year since that day in the conference room, the day he tried to break me in front of everyone. Now, when I walk into meetings, I hold my head high. My voice doesn't shake anymore. People listen not because I'm loud, but because I finally believe I deserve to be heard. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that photo on the floor outside my apartment. The silence, the fear, the way I froze. But then I remember what came next, the moment I stood up, the moment I said no more, and how that one choice changed everything. I used to think standing up to someone like Brian meant confrontation, but really it meant refusing to disappear. And that's what I did. I stopped disappearing. So if you're reading this and you've ever had someone make you feel small, don't wait for permission to stand tall again. Just do it. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster at your door. It's realizing how powerful you become once you open it.